धाम की जय।
जय
नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जय।
जय
गंगा माई की जय।
जय
यमुना माई की जय।
जय
तुलसी देवी की जय।
जय
भक्ति देवी की जय।
जय जय
समवेता भक्त वृंद की जय.
जय
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna
All glory to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga Hari Hari Bol.
Hare Hare
Om
Bol.
Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutare Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Shami Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Om Agyana Timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militang Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Nama Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gatamayam Dadati Sha Pandantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhaktavrinda.
Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhaktavrinda.
Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhaktavrinda.
Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
We're reading Sri Caitanya Caritamrita Adi Lila, chapter 7. We're at text number 42.
মূর্খ সন্ন্যাসী নিজ ধর্ম নাহি জানে ভাবুক হইয়া ফেরে ভাবুকের শনে.
This Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is an illiterate sannyasi, and therefore he does not know his real function. Guided only by his sentiments, he wanders about in the company of other sentimentalists. Purport: foolish Mayavadis, not knowing that the Krishna consciousness movement is based on solid philosophy of transcendental science, superficially conclude that those who dance and chant do not have philosophical knowledge. Those who are Krishna conscious actually have full knowledge of the essence of Vedanta philosophy, for they study the real commentary on the Vedanta philosophy, Srimad Bhagavatam, and follow the actual words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as found in the Bhagavad Gita as it is. After understanding the Bhagavad philosophy or Bhagavad Dharma, they become fully spiritually conscious or Krishna conscious. And therefore, everyone admires the ecstatic chanting and dancing of the devotees, who are therefore popularly known as the Hare Krishna people. Mayavadis cannot appreciate these activities because of their poor fund of knowledge. It's interesting in this verse, if we go up, look at the Bengali. See, it says murkha.
Yes.
Murkha.
Yes.
Is that a similar word in Sanskrit or
Telugu
Hindi?
also, yeah. Hindi
Yeah.
also.
Murka here is illiterate. Sometimes it's also translated as a fool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Muda.
Well, here Murka,
Murka also.
Murka.
Yeah.
When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu first met his spiritual master in Gaya, Ishwarpuri, his spiritual master said, use this same word, isn't it? He said, you're a fool, Murka, Murka. You shouldn't study the Vedanta, but you should always keep the holy name of Krishna in your throat. So this is it's interesting because Prakashananda, this is Prakashananda Saraswati's analysis. Oh, Lord Chaitanya's Murka, but for a different reason. He's trying to put down Lord Chaitanya, whereas Ishwar Puri was trying to give him a transcendental knowledge, transcendental instruction. Nija dharma nahi jane, doesn't know his purpose, his dharma. Jane is not, doesn't know. So Srila Prabhupada comments in the purport that they follow the actual devotees or Hare Krishna people follow the actual words of Krishna found in the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So there's two kinds of Krishna katha. You know this? Words spoken by Krishna
Hare Krishna.
and words spoken
Oh,
about Krishna. Yeah. So these two kinds of Krishna katha are the focus of Vaishnavas trying to make advancement in Krishna consciousness. So it says that the Vaishnavas actually follow the words of Krishna. And we find that's true, that there are people who have various philosophies, sometimes coming from India or sometimes other places, but they base, or they seem to base their philosophy on Bhagavad Gita. But when you actually highlight the words of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, they have a completely different understanding, or they try to screw some other funny understanding out of the Bhagavad Gita, except the words directly spoken or clearly spoken by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. For example, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, you know this verse, Bahunam Janmanam Ante. How does it go?
ज्ञानवान माम प्रपद्यते वासुदेवम सर्वमिति स्व महात्मा सुदुर्लभ.
Very good, very good. So Bahunam Janmanam Ante, at the end of many, many births, of the idea, the understanding is of searching for knowledge, just like the Mayavadi philosophers are searching for knowledge. After many, many births of searching for knowledge, Bahunam Janmanam Ante, Gyanavan, that person who actually has knowledge, what does that person do? Mam prapadyate, surrenders to me. Vasudeva Sarvamiti, that person knows that Vasudeva Krishna is everything. Samahatma Sudulabha, that person, that great soul is very rare. Also, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo. Yeah. You want to go on? Go ahead.
Yeah. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta jnanam pravartate.
Mata sarvam pravartate.
Mata sarvam pravartate. Iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha.
So Krishna says there, I am the source of everything. Everything is coming from me. The wise who know this perfectly, bhajante mam. Bhajante mam means what? They serve me. They worship me with service. Yeah. So these things are clearly stated by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, but because of those so-called followers of the Vedas have an ulterior motive, they obscure those very clear meaning and come up with a different idea. So therefore, Rupa Goswami says, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatriki Vidhim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Utpatayaiva Kalpate. That the spiritual life that doesn't really pay attention to the Shrutis and Smritis, as Bhagavad Gita is, Srimad Bhagavatam is, that just causes a disturbance in society. Okay. So next verse.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Question, comment.
Quick question. I always found this interesting how they considered Lord Chaitanya to be, less intelligent, especially because of his background being Nimai Pandit, and he defeated Keshava Kashmiri, and was well known as, as a young scholar. He had his own school. So the fact that he converted to being to the Bhakti Yoga school, one may think, okay, well, if you mastered one level of education and then you converted to become a devotee, obviously that must be higher, or at least must be given some credibility.
Very good point. But for some other reason, the Mayavadi sannyasis are don't recognize that progression and become critical of Lord Chaitanya. So what is the cause of that? What would you say the cause of that is?
Illusion.
Yeah, Maya, or
ignorance.
Srila Prabhupada used to say that those people who are Mayavadis, their interest is to become one with God and, in a sense, become God. So Prabhupada used to say that's the last snare of Maya. Because in the material world, as noted in the chat, everybody wants to become the topmost head, big person, and have power over others. So in the material world, people get frustrated with that. Okay, so then they can't do it, in their family, in their society, in their country. So then they say, okay, well, I'll become God. So it's a kind of power play, envy of Krishna. So that clouds our clear consciousness.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yeah.
Do the Mayavadis think that the ultimate goal is actually jnana? Because I keep on hearing them say jnana. So what we say theoretical knowledge. I'm just trying to understand.
Their goal is to merge with the Supreme, and in order to do that, they cultivate knowledge by studying the Vedas, or Vedanta, etc. So the knowledge is a means to the end of becoming one with the Supreme Impersonal Brahman. In so doing, though, they decry the personal form of God, his attributes, his qualities, his name. On the other hand, the Vaishnava doesn't decry the impersonal feature of the absolute truth. He or she is very well aware of it, but understands that that's only a partial understanding of the Supreme. And so that knowledge, simply knowledge without service, won't bring you to understand the full, complete understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam also we see Sutta Goswami says, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janiyatu Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayadahaitukam. That by Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga, by performing Bhakti Yoga to Vasudeva Krishna, Janiyatu Ashu Vairagyam means very quickly one gets renunciation, jnanam, and knowledge. So that knowledge, though, is full knowledge, not the incomplete knowledge that might be obtained by the Mayavadi or the person just striving for impersonal understanding. Yeah.
Should I continue?
Sure.
এসব শুনিয়া প্রভু হাসে মনে মনে, উপেক্ষা করিয়া কারো না কইল সম্ভাষণে।
Hearing all this blasphemy, Lord Chaitanya merely smiled to himself, rejected all these accusations, and did not talk with the Mayavadis. As Krishna conscious devotees, we do not like to converse with Mayavadi philosophers simply to waste valuable time. But whenever there is an opportunity, we impress our philosophy upon them with great vigor and success.
উপেক্ষা করিয়া কইল মথুরা গমন, মথুরা দেখিয়া পুনঃ কইল আগমন।
Thus, neglecting the blasphemy of the Varanasi Mayavadis, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu proceeded to Mathura. And after visiting Mathura, he returned to meet the situation. Purport: Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not talk with the Mayavadi philosophers when he first visited Varanasi, but when he returned there from Mathura to convince them of the real purpose of Vedanta. So he didn't forget them. On his way to Vrindavan, he stopped there. He heard the complaints and criticisms, smiled internally, and went to Vrindavan. He had a more important business in Vrindavan there, but then came back and took care of the situation.
কাশীতে লেখক শূদ্র শ্রী চন্দ্রশেখর, তার ঘরে রহিলা প্রভু স্বতন্ত্র ঈশ্বর।
This time, Lord Chaitanya stayed at the house of Chandrasekhar, although he was regarded as a Shudra or Kayasta, for the Lord, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is completely independent. Purport: Lord Chaitanya stayed at the house of Chandrasekhar, a clerk, although a sannyasi is not supposed to reside in a Shudra's house. 500 years ago, especially in Bengal, it was the system that persons who were born in the families of Brahmins were accepted as Brahmins, and all those who took birth in other families, even the higher castes, namely the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, were considered Shudra, non-Brahmins. Therefore, although Sri Chandrasekhar was a clerk from a Kayasta family in Upper India, he was considered a Shudra. Similarly, Vaishyas, especially those of the Suvarnavarnik community, were accepted as Shudras in Bengal, and even the Vaidyas, who were generally physicians, were also considered Shudras. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, however, did not accept this artificial principle, which was introduced in society by self-interested men. And later, the Kayastas, Vaidyas, and Boniks all began to accept the sacred thread despite objections by the so-called Brahmins. Before the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Suvarna Vanik class was condemned by Balal Sen, who was then the king of Bengal, due to a personal grudge. In Bengal, the Suvarna Vanik class are always very rich, for they are bankers and dealers in gold and silver. Therefore, Balal Sen used to borrow money from a Suvarnavanik banker. Balal Sen's bankruptcy later obliged the Suvarnavanik banker to stop advancing money to him. And thus he became angry and condemned the entire Suvarnavanik society as belonging to the Shudra community. Balal Sen tried to induce the Brahmins not to accept the Suvarnavaniks as followers of the instructions of the Vedas under the Brahminical directions. But although some Brahmins approved of Balal Sen's actions, others did not. Thus, the Brahmins also became divided amongst themselves, and those who supported the Suvarnavanik class were rejected from the Brahmin community. At the present day, the same biases are still being followed. There are many Vaishnava families in Bengal whose members, although not actually born Brahmins, act as acharyas by initiating disciples and offering the sacred thread as enjoined in the Vaishnava Tantras. For example, in the families of Thakur Raghunanda, Acharya Thakur Krishnadas, Nabina Hora, and Risikananda Dev, a disciple of Shyamananda Prabhu, the sacred thread ceremony is performed, as it is for the caste Goswamis. And this system has continued for the past 300 or 400 years. Accepting disciples born in Brahmin families, they are bona fide spiritual masters who have the facility to worship Shalagram Shila, which is worshipped with the deity. As of this writing, Shalagram Shila worship has not yet been introduced in our Krishna consciousness movement, but soon it will be introduced in all our temples as an essential function of Archan Marg, deity worship. Questions or comments on this? Quite a lot to swallow here.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Shouldn't people in the spiritual space rise above all these like mundane fightings, like about power games and all these things? Because this seems to be like a regular people fighting on the street. Shouldn't spiritual people be a little bit more elevated and have some kind of a decency?
You would hope so, but unfortunately, there's always in the realm of this material world, Maya is very strong, and Maya tends to, her service is to divert people from genuine spiritual life. So these kinds of infections come into play, especially in this day and age, where people become overly concerned with material designations like caste or gender or position in society, and see that as more important than a person's spiritual qualification. There's a nice verse. I don't remember there's a couple of verses ago. One is Lord Chaitanya said, "Je bhaje she boro, abhakta hin char, Krishna bhajana nahi jati kulade bichar." That means that person who's worshiping Krishna, they're great. They're wonderful. Boro, great. But the non-devotees, they're lower. That just by worshiping Krishna, by those who worship Krishna, you don't consider jati. Jati can mean caste. It can also mean their birth situation. Kuladi is their family. Bichar, yeah. All these things, they don't consider these things. But as Prabhupada wrote in the purport, by self-interested people who want to maintain their position in a high position in society without proper qualification, spiritual qualification, as you adroitly point out, they make artificial distinctions and try to put down others. Why? Because by putting down others, they think they can remain at a high position. That's usually the way it is in the world. We see someone who has a good qualification and we want to put it down. Just like the Mayavadi sannyasis are trying to discredit Lord Chaitanya because they're not really fixed in Brahman. They're worried that they're not really spiritually elevated, which they weren't. So Lord Krishna, go ahead.
But technically, nobody rises by putting down somebody, or nobody rises by some fake designation. If
Yes,
somebody has to,
that should be well recognized. But unfortunately, we all of us within this material world have this material tendency to criticize others unnecessarily and put down others. So that's a very deep, deep anartha within the heart. And to rise above that requires, actual purification by Krishna consciousness. And it's not always easy. But we see in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmani Gavi Hashtini Shuni Chayava Sapakecha Pandita Samadashana. Someone who rises to the actual Brahmin platform, spiritual platform, they regard everyone equally. It's not, of course, they don't make friends with the elephants necessarily. I mean, they're close friends, but or the dogs, but they regard them with respect in their as indwelling of the soul and the super soul there. Other comments?
Yeah, I have a question, Prabhu, about worshipping the Sila.
Yeah.
So, as a Prabhupada said, it's not introduced in ISKCON, this purport is going to be introduced later on. So,
Yeah.
I've seen that many devotees in ISKCON, they have, they have so many silas. Some of them are like hundreds of silas, some have even more than 100 silas. I know in LA there's one devotee. There's a lot of devotee are worshipping sila. So what do you think about it?
Well, only one Shila is required to worship, and the Shila is generally the Brahmins were part of their sadhana was worshiping Shalagram Shila as because the Shalagram Shila is the part of the form of the Lord. So, with big deities, with large deities, it's you can't do the worship like bathing with 5 substances and things like that. So the worship of the Shila is a representative of when you do the worship for the Shila, it's accepted by as being given also to the large deities at the same time. So that's the idea of the Shalagram Shila worship. It's a similar kind of thing as with, you have large deities and then they have the smaller deities similar to that. The point that devotees have multiple Shilas, well, sometimes it happens that people take a Shila and then give it up, but I don't have any comment on that. If they can do the service and do the service nicely, very good, very good. It's not required. A lot of Shilas aren't required. Only one Shila is nice. Go ahead.
You said it's not introduced in ISKCON. So did Prabhupada, recommend that we worship?
Yeah. He introduced it about this time. This was 1974, something like that, around 73, 74, when he wrote this.
Okay.
Then afterwards, there were Shilas. There were Shalagram Shila in New York, and they still have Shalagram Shila. I don't think we have Shalagram Shila in Philadelphia.
No.
Huh?
No.
No, we don't.
But,
Prabhu, excuse me, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, Shaligram Shila is part of Vishnu, right? My father worshipped Shila. It was handed down from my grandfather.
Yes.
So instead of worshipping anything else, he was very, very particular about, as females, when I was little, we were not allowed to touch, or only, mother can see, but she prepared food. But only my father was doing it, Abhishek and all that to Shaligram. I think it was, from grandfather's time, great-grandfather's time. So I think he thought it was Vishnu, and we were not allowed to even go really look into things. But that's good. Srila Prabhupada changed everything, and the women were allowed to touch and do, Abhishek and all that to Shaligram Shila. It's really good.
Well, actually, Srila Prabhupada didn't change it. There's two different systems of worship. One is called Pancharatriki Vidhi, and one is called Smarta Vidhi. And sometimes they get mixed up. But Pancharatriki Vidhi is given by Narad Muni in his Narada Pancharatra. And the Smarta Vidhi is developed from the Vedas, but it's more, it's considered more orthodox. But so Srila Prabhupada promulgated the worship as Pancharatriki Vidhi. And in Pancharatriki Vidhi, ladies are certainly allowed to do deity worship and dress the deities and do the worship. So those two kinds were there popular. But we're in the line of Lord Brahma, and Narad Muni is in that line too. So we're following that directions.
So both vidhis are the same?
No. Smarta Vidhi is going to give more emphasis on being born a Brahmin, whereas Pancharatriki Vidhi says that anyone by proper training and by initiation by a bona fide spiritual master and by following the regulative principles can become a Brahmin. So these are two different approaches to understanding spiritual life. One places a strong emphasis on birth, family of birth. And we're not saying that family of birth is not important, because family of birth family develops your early interests and things like that. But more important than birth is training by spiritual training, especially by a bona fide guru who can teach you, even if you're born in a family that's not elevated, like even a Mlecha Jabana, if they can be elevated by following the regulative principles and being trained by a bona fide spiritual master, they can also be qualified to worship the deity. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that, what is that verse? Mam hi parta vyapashritya tepi supapa yoniya striyo vaishastata shudras tepi yanti param gatim. Anyone who takes shelter of me, whether they be lowborn, shudras, ladies, etc., they get the supreme destination. They can go back to Godhead. And in order to go back to Godhead, one has to be fully purified. One can't go back halfway purified. So this is Lord Krishna's view also. What do we say?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Thank you.
Yeah. Mother Sudevi has a question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Or a comment.
Yeah. Hare Krishna, Mother Sudevi.
Yes, Prabhu. So what would you say about Govardhan Srila? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu worshipping Govardhan Srila himself?
Yes. Govardhan Srila's the same or similar to Shalagram Srila, because devotees say that, well, it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when there was the Govardhan Leela pastime, Krishna announced to the residents of Vrindavan that he was Govardhan Hill. He is Govardhan Hill. So devotees, usually you have to receive it from some special way, but Lord Chaitanya would accept would do that service. Usually, one of the reasons why there's the Shalagram Shila for Brahman is especially worshipped is because if you have larger deities, they're sometimes difficult to travel with. But a Shalagram Shila is a small, this size, and so you can it's much easier to travel with. And Brahmins, especially, in their later times, they travel here or there. So then taking the Shalagram Shila and continuing to the worship regularly is much easier. Next verse.
তপন মিশ্রের ঘরে ভিক্ষা নির্বাহন সন্ন্যাসীর সঙ্গে নাহি মানে নিমন্ত্রণ।
As a matter of principle, Lord Chaitanya regularly accepted his food at the house of Tapan Mishra. He never mixed with other sannyasis, nor did he accept invitations from them. Purport. This exemplary behavior of Lord Chaitanya definitely proves that a Vaishnav sannyasi cannot accept invitations from Mayavadi sannyasis or intimately mix with them. So here we get a little. So Lord Chaitanya is going to mix with them later, but not intimately, or not intimately until they become Vaishnav sannyasis. This is.
সনাতন গোসাই আসি তাহাই মিলিলা তার শিক্ষা লাগি প্রভু 2 মাস রহিলা।
When Sanatan Goswami came from Bengal, he met Lord Chaitanya at the house of Tapan Mishra, where Lord Chaitanya remained continuously for 2 months to teach him devotional service. Purport. Lord Chaitanya taught Sanatan Goswami in the line of disciplic succession. Sanatan Goswami was a very learned scholar in Sanskrit and other languages, but until instructed by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he did not write anything about Vaishnav behavior. His very famous book, Hari Bhakti Vilas, which gives directions for Vaishnav candidates, was written completely in compliance with the instructions of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we switched from reading, we were in the middle of Lord Chaitanya's instructions to Sanatan Goswami, right here. So that's one of the reasons we switched back, and we'll come back to teachings of Sanatan Goswami. So right here, it's the same time Lord Chaitanya was in the midst of describing the method of devotional service to Sanatan Goswami as when he was speaking to the, who are going to speak with the Mayavadi sannyasis. In his Hari Bhakti Vilas, Sri Sanatan Goswami gives definite instructions that by proper initiation by a bona fide spiritual master, one can immediately become a Brahmin. In this connection, he says, Yata kancharatam yati kamsyang rasa vidhanita tata diksha vidhanena dvijatam jayate nrinam. As bell metal is turned to gold when mixed with mercury in an alchemical process, so one who is properly trained and initiated by a bona fide spiritual master immediately becomes a Brahmin. Has anybody done this to try to turn bell metal into gold? Nobody here anyway. Okay. Sometimes those born in Brahmin families protest this, but they have no strong arguments against this principle. By the grace of Krishna and his devotees, one's life can change. This is confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam by the words Jahati Bandham and Shuddhanti. Jahati Bandham indicates that a living entity is conditioned by a particular type of body. The body is certainly an impediment, but one who associates with a pure devotee and follows his instructions can avoid this impediment and become a regular Brahmin by initiation under his strict guidance. Srila Jiva Goswami states how a non-Brahmin can be turned into a Brahmin by the association of a pure devotee. Prabha Vishnave Namaha. You know where that Prabha Vishnave Namaha comes from? That's a quote from a particular verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. Mother Sudevi. No? Okay. Anyway.
Kira ate na po kita parkasa abira gaganas so that voice and then it what then.
Yes. Very good. I thought you knew that because there's a description by Shukadeva Goswami about all these different kinds of people. Kirata, Huns, Kirata, Hunanda, Pulinda, Pulkasha, Andras, different from different parts of the world. And then at the end, he says, and all of these people can become fully purified. How? By taking shelter of the devotee of Vishnu. So Lord Vishnu is so powerful that he can do anything he likes. Therefore, it is not difficult for Vishnu to change the body of a devotee who is under the guidance of a pure devotee of the Lord. Shall we do one more?
তারে শিখাইলা সব বৈষ্ণবের ধর্ম, ভাগবত আদি শাস্ত্রের যত গূঢ় মর্ম।
On the basis of scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam, which reveal these confidential directions, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed Sanatan Goswami regarding all the regular activities of a devotee. Purport. In the Parampara system, the instructions taken from the bona fide spiritual master must also be based on revealed Vedic scriptures. Like we said, Shruti, Shmiti, Purana, Adi. One who is in the line of the disciplic succession cannot manufacture his own way of behavior. There are many so-called followers of the Vaishnava cult in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who do not scrupulously follow the conclusions of the Shastras, and therefore they are considered to be apasampradaya, which means outside the sampradaya. Some of these groups are known as Aul, Baul, Kartabhaja, Neda, Daravesha, Shani, Sahajya, Sakhibheki, Smarta, Jatagoshani, Ativadi, Chudahari, and Goranganagari. In order to follow strictly the disciplic succession of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one should not associate with these apasampradaya communities. So these are sometimes called the Prakrita Sahajiyas. They take things cheaply, the relationship between Radha and Krishna, and they pervert the idea of pure devotional service to include enjoyment for the individual soul on a material platform. So Lord Chaitanya, his followers, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, were instrumental in clarifying the deviation of these different apasampradayas. It's nicely described in the Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, because each one of them has a certain particular slant or deviation that they introduced into Lord Chaitanya's pure philosophy. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they particularly highlighted these deviations and corrected them. One who is not taught by a bona fide spiritual master cannot understand the Vedic literature. To emphasize this point, Lord Krishna, while instructing Arjun, clearly said that it was because Arjun was his devotee and confidential friend that he could understand the mystery of Bhagavad Gita. It is to be concluded, therefore, that one who wants to understand the mystery of revealed scriptures must approach a bona fide spiritual master, hear from him very submissively, and render service to him. Then the import of scriptures will be revealed, as it is stated in the Vedas, Yasya deve para bhaktir yata deve tata guru tasyaiti katita hyarta prakashante mahatmana. The real import of the scriptures is revealed to one who has unflinching faith in both the spiritual Supreme Personality of Godhead and spiritual master. Srila Narottam Das Thakur advises, Sadhu Shastra Guru Vakya Hridaye Korya Aikya. The meaning of this instruction is that one must consider the instructions of the sadhu, the revealed scriptures, and the spiritual master in order to understand the real purpose of spiritual life. Neither a sadhu, saintly person or Vaishnava, nor a bona fide spiritual master says anything that is beyond the scope of the sanction of the revealed scriptures. Thus, the statements of the revealed scriptures correspond to those of the bona fide spiritual master and saintly persons. One must therefore act with reference to these three important sources of understanding. Hare Krishna. Very nicely, very good teachings today, as usual. Questions, comments, corrections, observations?
So when controversies like this and debates of different schools of thought arise, like who has the highest power? Like who do they go to for resolving these critical philosophical questions, who is right, who is wrong? Who gets the highest authority to determine in this setting?
Well, we say that Krishna has the highest authority. And so quoting or citing Shastras, especially Bhagavad Gita and Vedas and Srimad Bhagavatam Vedanta Sutra is the conclusion. All of the schools of thought, for example, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Vishnu Swami, they all were debating with people, spiritualists who had other understandings. But they came out successfully. Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, they all became recognized as authorities, as did Lord Chaitanya. We'll see in this pastime specifically, we'll see how there were all these Mayavadi philosophers. They had a particular understanding, but Lord Chaitanya, as the supreme authority, as Krishna himself, was able to enlighten them with full spiritual understanding. So the same kind of thing happens also. Srila Prabhupada was able to do that very, very succinctly, regularly, completely. But there's no government body that will verify that. Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vishnu.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhiveva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namaha. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Thank you. Thanks a million.
Hare Krishna devotees. Thank Vishnu Prabhu for a very wonderful class this morning. I also want to remind everyone that tonight we have Bhagavad Gita at 5 o'clock to 5:30. And then tomorrow is the appearance day of Advaitacharya Prabhu. His Grace Balabhadra Prabhu will be giving the morning class at 7:50. And then in the evening, Vishnu Prabhu will be giving a class on Advaitacharya in lieu of the Srila Prabhupada Leela night. At the same time, but we'll be speaking on Advaitacharya that evening. 6:30, we'll have an artik, we'll show the Panchatattva, receiving artik, which includes Advaitacharya Prabhu. So that's coming up tomorrow. It's also a fast till noonday tomorrow as well.
So there is no Brahma Samhita tomorrow night, Vishnu Prabhu?
I guess if we're going to do the arti, then we'll have to postpone that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vishnu Prabhu.